The city was already awake when I leaned back in my leather chair, the skyline glittering through the floor-to-ceiling glass of my office. From up here, the world looked smaller, quieter, as if all the chaos belonged to someone else. My silk blouse still carried the faint scent of lavender from the morning steam, and the cool rim of my coffee cup rested against my lip when my phone buzzed across the mahogany desk. It was a message. From my cousin, Daniel. Family meeting. Mandatory. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. Don't be late this time. I laughed, softly, shaking my head. Family meeting. The same words that had once felt like a blade across my chest. I set the phone down and let my eyes wander across the office. The paintings I had chosen myself, the glass vases my assistant rotated weekly with fresh tulips, the gold-edged business magazines stacked neatly with my name featured on their covers. If only they knew. If only they realized they were sending me an invitation to a conference room inside my building. My heels tapped against the marble floor as I stood and walked to the window. 10 years ago, they'd shoved me out of their circle. Voices raised, eyes filled with doubt. Today, they'd walk through doors I had bought with my own signature. And tomorrow, they'd learn the truth. I still remember the night it all broke apart. The Harrington family meetings were a ritual, held in the grand dining room of my father's house in Connecticut, with mahogany walls that smelled faintly of polish and cigars. Everyone sat around the long table, crystal glasses filled, voices sharp and confident, like they all believed the world couldn't move without our name attached to it. That night, I was 23, clutching a folder of notes so tightly my knuckles were white. I had spent weeks researching an idea for the company, an expansion plan, something fresh, something that would bring us into the modern age. My pulse hammered as I cleared my throat. I have a proposal, I began, sliding my papers onto the table. For a moment, the room quieted. My Uncle Richard leaned back, arms folded. My cousin Daniel smirked. My father didn't even look at me, just sipped his scotch. I laid out the details. The numbers, the growth potential, the risks, the vision. My voice trembled at first, but I studied it, forcing strength into every word. When I finished, I looked around, waiting for a flicker of recognition. Instead, silence. Then laughter. Cute, Daniel said, tapping the folder like it was a child's drawing. Adorable effort, Emily, but leave business to the men who understand it. My throat tightened. I do understand it. This plan could. Richard cut me off. Enough. You're young, naive, and frankly, this isn't your place. We have real decisions to make. The sting was sharp, burning behind my eyes. My hands shook under the table, and I pressed them into my lap to hide it. I looked to my father, praying for even the smallest offense. He didn't raise his head. Emily, Richard said, waving toward the door. Why don't you sit this one out? Come back when you've grown up. The humiliation was unbearable. The sound of chairs creaking, the scrape of silverware, the murmurs of approval from around the table, it all blurred into a deafening roar inside my head. I gathered my papers with trembling fingers and stood, every step toward that door heavier than the last. As I reached the hallway, I felt a soft hand on my arm. It was my grandmother, Eleanor, silver hair pinned neatly, eyes shining with quiet fire. She leaned close and whispered words I'll never forget. One day, Emily, they'll regret the day they closed the door on you. Because you'll be the one holding the keys. That night, as tears streaked down my face and I stuffed my notes into a box, I made a promise to myself. I would never beg them for a seat at their table again. I would build my own. The first days on my own were humbling. I rented a cramped studio apartment in Queens, its walls thin enough to hear the neighbor's TV late into the night. My office was nothing more than a second-hand desk wedged by the window, where the radiator clanged so loudly in winter I had to wear headphones just to think. Still, it was mine. Mine alone. I worked nights at a cafe to pay rent, wiping counters until my hands ached, and spent the mornings poring over real estate manuals, financial reports, and any book the library would let me borrow. The language of numbers, contracts, and investments felt like a secret code, one I was determined to crack. It was during one of those bleary-eyed mornings at the cafe that I met her. "Do you ever stop moving?" a voice asked as I refilled someone's cup. I looked up to see Margaret Cole, sharp navy suit, silver brooch glinting under the lights. I'd seen her in the papers, one of the city's most respected property developers. I stammered, but she only smiled. "You've got focus in your eyes. Don't waste it." That single conversation turned into mentorship. Margaret invited me to shadow her at meetings, to watch her negotiate, to see how a woman could command a room full of men without ever raising her voice. She taught me what contracts to avoid, where to take risks, and when to walk away. But learning was the easy part. The hard part was the failures. Deals that fell through. Investors who never called back. Nights when I cried into my pillow, wondering if my family had been right about me all along. Still, I refused to give them that victory. Every rejection fueled me. Every closed door sharpened my resolve. My first win came small, a rundown duplex in Brooklyn no one else wanted. I scraped together every penny I had, signed the papers with shaking hands, and spent months fixing it up myself. When it sold, I made a modest profit, but it was enough. Enough to prove I could do this. One deal led to another. I flipped houses, reinvested, and moved slowly up the ladder. Each success was a brick, stacking higher, building the foundation of something far greater than I dared to admit. Margaret pushed me further. "Think bigger, Emily. Stop playing in the kiddie pool when the ocean is right there." So I did. I saved, strategized, and when the opportunity came, I took it. A towering office building on Fifth Avenue. It was a risk so enormous I nearly choked signing the check. But something inside me whispered, "This is it." When the ink dried, the deed carried my name. Not theirs. Not the men who mocked me. Mine. I never told my family. On social media, I kept my updates modest, smiling photos at coffee shops, vague captions about busy days. They never asked more, never suspected the empire I was quietly building. They thought I was struggling. They thought I was invisible. And I let them. Because one day, I knew, the reveal would be worth every silent year. The morning of the meeting, I dressed with deliberate care. A fitted navy sheath dress, a pearl necklace Margaret once gave me, and heels polished to a mirror shine. As I fastened the diamond bracelet at my wrist, I caught my reflection in the mirror, steady, unflinching, no trace of the girl who once trembled under her family's laughter. The building lobby hummed with life when I arrived. My building. Glass doors gleamed, marble floors reflected the morning sunlight, and the receptionist greeted me with a warm, "Good morning, Miss Harrington." I smiled. "Good morning, Rachel. How's the coffee machine treating you today?" We shared a small laugh, and I walked toward the elevators. The brass doors slid shut, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with anticipation. On the 14th floor, the conference room was already buzzing. My father, Richard, Daniel, and several others were seated, their papers spread across the glossy oak table. Not one of them noticed me at first. "Emily," Daniel finally said, glancing up. "Glad you could make it on time for once." I took a seat, folding my hands neatly in my lap. Wouldn't miss it. They launched into discussion, financial losses, lease renegotiations, the company's strained future. I listened quietly, letting their words swirl around me. Finally, Richard dropped the bomb. "Our landlord has raised the lease again. If this keeps up, we'll have to consider relocation." A murmur of frustration rippled through the table. That was my cue. "Actually," I said, my voice calm but cutting through the noise, "you won't have to worry about that anymore." Every head turned toward me. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked, eyebrows furrowing. I reached into my leather portfolio and slid a folder across the table. Their eyes followed as Richard opened it, his face draining of color. Inside was the deed. My deed. With my signature at the bottom. I continued, "that your landlord isn't raising the lease. She's sitting right here." Silence. Thick, stunned silence. "You?" Richard's voice cracked with disbelief. I leaned back, letting the weight of the moment sink in. "Yes. I own this building. Bought it 3 years ago. Every office, every floor, every brick. And that includes this conference room. The expressions around the table were priceless. Confusion, denial, a flush of shame creeping up Daniel's neck. My father stared at the papers as though they might change if he blinked hard enough. This is impossible, Daniel sputtered. Where would you even get that kind of money? I smiled faintly. While you were busy dismissing me, I was busy working, learning, building. Turns out, when someone slams a door in your face, you can buy the whole building instead. The room fell quiet again. I could hear the hum of the air conditioner, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, my father lifted his eyes to mine. There was no anger there, just something softer. Something he wasn't ready to name. You kept this from us? He asked, voice low. You never asked, I said simply. For a long moment, no one moved. The balance of power had shifted entirely, and they all knew it. I gathered my portfolio, stood, and walked slowly to the head of the table. My heels clicked against the polished floor with each deliberate step. Standing there, I looked at each of them, the same people who once told me I didn't belong. Well, I said, letting the silence hang one beat longer. Shall we continue this meeting in my building? The silence after my reveal lingered like smoke in the air, thick and undeniable. For years, they had spoken over me, dismissed me, laughed at me. Now, every set of eyes in that room was locked on me, waiting. I let them sit in it for a while. Let them taste what it felt like to have no power, no control, only questions. Here's how this is going to work, I finally said, my tone measured even. I'm not here to punish anyone, but things cannot, and will not, continue as they have. Richard bristled. Emily, you can't just waltz in here and… Actually, I interrupted smoothly. I can. This is my building. You operate under my roof now, and that means we do things differently. Or you find another space. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, jaw tight. My father said nothing, still staring at the deed like it might dissolve in his hands. I placed both palms on the table, leaning forward slightly. If you want my continued partnership, I have conditions. Non-negotiable. I looked first at Daniel. You, cousin, will stop treating people as though their value depends on whether they agree with you. That arrogance nearly cost this family everything. If you want to stay, you will listen, not mock. And you will earn respect, not demand it. His mouth opened to argue, but I raised a hand. I'm not finished. Turning to Richard, I kept my voice calm but firm. You will stop silencing voices you don't understand. You will learn that leadership is not the same as control. If you can't manage that, step aside and let someone else lead. I shifted my gaze across the others. Each of you will face your own truths. Stop clinging to outdated ways because they feel comfortable. Stop cutting corners to save face. And for once, just once, start asking what's possible instead of what's easy. Finally, I turned to my father. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. And you will acknowledge me. Not as the daughter you dismiss, but as the woman who has stood on her own 2 feet, without your approval, without your money, without your protection. That's my only demand. The weight of my words settled heavily. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic outside the window. I softened just slightly because strength didn't mean cruelty. I don't want revenge. I don't want to humiliate you. But I refuse to go back to the girl you pushed out of this room. If you want to move forward, we do it with respect, honesty, and change. Otherwise, this partnership ends here. I straightened, letting the silence return. Their faces were a mix, shame, resistance, and something new, the dawning realization that I wasn't bluffing. For the first time in my life, they understood the power I carried. And for the first time in theirs, they had to decide whether they were willing to meet me on my terms. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. For the first time, my family's calls weren't to bark orders or dismiss ideas. They asked questions. Real ones. Daniel reached out first, awkwardly, his voice lower than usual. Emily, can we meet? I want to hear your thoughts on a new client pitch. It wasn't much, but it was something. Richard stopped interrupting in meetings. I watched him bite his tongue more than once, his jaw tightening as he forced himself to listen. It was almost comical, but also progress. And my father, he struggled most of all. We met in my office one evening after everyone else had gone. He stood by the window, looking out at the city, hands in his pockets like a man who suddenly realized the world was bigger than he'd ever allowed it to be. "You remind me of her," he said finally, voice rough. I frowned. "Who?" "Your grandmother. Eleanor." His shoulders dropped as though the weight of years pressed down all at once. "She believed in you. I should have too." My throat tightened, but I stayed steady. "It's not too late to start." Something shifted in his eyes then. Not a full apology, he wasn't quite there yet, but acknowledgement. For me, that was enough. Slowly, the dynamic began to change. Meetings became less about dominance and more about collaboration. My conditions weren't just rules, they became a path toward healing, toward something better than the hollow empire they had clung to for so long. Late one night, I sat alone in my office, the city lights glittering beyond the glass. On the corner of my desk rested the small brooch my grandmother once wore, the one she had pressed into my hand after that humiliating meeting years ago. I picked it up, running my thumb over the cool silver, and felt her words echo back to me. "One day, they'll regret closing the door. Because you'll be the one holding the keys." She was right. I wasn't just holding the keys. I had built the door, the walls, the entire foundation. And this time, I wasn't asking for permission to walk in, I was deciding who got to stay. I smiled, set the brooch back down, and whispered softly to the empty room. The day they kicked me out, they thought they ended my story. But all they really did was hand me the pen.